Hey everyone, Dallin here, and I am going to tell you today about the first three thresholds of greater complexity that we have discussed in the last few weeks of world civilizations. Interestingly enough, the first thing that happened in the universe was the creation of it. Shocker, right? And because there was nothing before there was anything, the creation of the universe was the first threshold of increased complexity. There was nothing, and then there was something, and something is definitely more complex than nothing, therefore the creation of something was an increase in the complexity that we already had. This first threshold, according to scientists, occurred 13.8 billion years ago, and is what we call today the Big Bang. The universe suddenly expanded from a tiny, very small point. In the first few seconds, it went from something being that small, so small that it would make a grain of sand seem huge, to a space so big that we can hardly imagine it as human beings. And according to John Green in Crash Course Big History episode number 1, if it had begun as the size of a tennis ball, it would have suddenly expanded to over 90 billion light years across in much less the blink of an eye. Very quickly, the governing laws that we know in the universe today, like gravity, specifically the second law of thermodynamics, which I'm going to talk about in a bit, were already in force, allowing for the universe to evolve into what it is today. Now, the second law of thermodynamics is that matter can neither be created nor destroyed. It simply changes form. This law was working at this time after the universe exploded, and that is what has allowed for everything today to come into place. And what's interesting with that is that everything today that we see in the world, this shirt that I'm wearing, these headphones I have on, that wall behind me, your composition, everything, all the matter that we have was around in the first few seconds after that Big Bang. The matter that was created formed with the antimatter in the first few seconds, and when it formed with the antimatter, it destroyed itself, leaving only 1/1000th of the original matter to continue to do its work. So today, all the matter we have in the universe is 1/1000th of what was originally there right after the Big Bang happened. Okay, let's keep going. So, the bang occurs, it's super hot, and then just after a few minutes, everything cools down to the point that hydrogen and helium, which were the only elements at the time, start to fuse they weren't elements at the time actually, they started to become elements. Their nuclei began to fuse together. Matter and radiation, as we know them today, were one thing, and the universe was super hot, and because of that they remained as one thing. Until a long time later, the universe cooled down from whatever temperature it was then to only 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, allowing for the matter and radiation to separate. This marked the release of CBR, or cosmic background radiation, which marked the end of what we call the dark ages of the universe. Now, when the Big Bang happened, there were tiny little blimps on the quantum scale that you can see in cosmic background radiation today. These little blimps, or imperfections as we might call them, grew into bigger forms to the point where gravity started clumping things like dust and gas that were floating around in the universe together. Hydrogen and helium, the gases that we had, were being sucked together into clouds that became denser and denser with these atoms of hydrogen and helium. And the centers were growing especially dense. The hydrogen and helium is getting closer and closer together, hotter and hotter and hotter. And then, just like rubbing two logs together, boom, a huge fire flared up, and the first stars were created. This, the creation of stars, is the second threshold of greater complexity. It took place about 100 million years after the Big Bang. And the reason it was an increase in complexity is because of what happened next. It was because of the possibilities that it opened up. Some stars eventually kind of burn out and die, but other stars end their lives in a different way. So the star is created by this huge explosion. Now what happens is the star, after it's formed, has another big explosion that we call a supernovae, and when that happens, new elements are released. While the hydrogen and helium are inside the star, the nuclei get stuck together in different ways, and more complex elements are formed. Now, the formation of these more complex elements is the third threshold of greater complexity. And the reason for that is because everything we see around us today is made up of these new elements that the stars began to create. So, there you have it. Those are the first three thresholds of greater complexity. Now, those of us that have grown up with the Genesis creation myth as a favorite bedtime story, such as myself, rightly should question what, if any, of this information is true. It could be that science has all of this wrong. It could be that bits and pieces of it are true. It could be that all of this did occur and was the way that God created the universe. And my hope is that all of us will continue to remember the things that we've been taught and make sure that we look at this information we're learning through the right lenses to make sure that we don't allow false truths to creep into our lives. Thank you very much for watching. I will see all of you in class. Have fun.